All right, let's get started. Welcome to another class of Best Hebrew Class Ever. Today, as I mentioned, we're getting into the meat and potatoes, the main entree of Hebrew grammar. And this is especially good for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be good for you. I think you'll find this very interesting. And so, I want to go first. I like to do a big picture. There are two ways in my mind. There's two ways I can teach you Hebrew. I can teach you Hebrew little by little, like little puzzle pieces, and then have you put it all together. Or I can give you the big picture first, and then we can go into detail later. So I like to do big picture first, but I think that people can conceptualize it much better now. So Hebrew being a Semitic language, this, what I'm about to tell you right now, applies for Arabic. It applies for, I think, any Semitic language. I mean, those are the main two, right? But this is a totally different system than any Western language. This whole concept of binyanim. So what is it? We've got 7 categories here. And I think the easiest way is to show you on the sheet. Like, if you turn to sheet 1, just start with sheet 1.
Is that the one with the
Yeah,
one on
yeah,
it?
with the one on top. Here you have, this is out of a book called 501 Hebrew Verbs, amazing book. If you get that book, you will learn all this stuff in detail. But here we've got, it goes by root, right? So the root is 3 letters. You've got the aleph, hey, bet, right at the top. That root right there means love. So everything that's related to love in Hebrew, ahava, comes from that root. La'ahov, the verb to love, etc., right? But you've got here 2 verbs from that root, right? One of them is ahav. That's the first one. You see that, ahav. The next one down, it says hitahev, right? Same root. You see where the root is, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Everyone's following along?
Where do you see Hita head?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, sorry.
Right? So what you're seeing here is a table. You've got, the table here is telling you, you've got present tense in the column, past tense, future tense, and imperative, that's the command form, right? So you got all those forms for the verb ahav, and then you've got all those forms for the verb hitahev, which are different, right? So what's the difference here? The first one is a pa'al verb. The second one is a hipa'al verb. That's why the first one is ahav, like pa'al. The next one you see is hitahev, because it's hitpa'al. You see? So how do we get the names? How do we get the names of these forms, right? The names come from taking this root right here, which just means to do, or to act, right? Which is pei, ayin, lamed. Okay, and we take the form, we create the form of the binyan from those 3 letters. So we apply all the prefixes and suffixes, etc., to it to create the very name of it. Okay, so that right there is going to match exactly with the form. The name of the binyan matches the form of the actual binyan, right? So how does it work?
Question.
Go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
How do we get, wouldn't this be, the heat pile is
Yeah.
reflexive,
That's right.
reciprocal, but how do we get to fall, or like to,
Well, what it means is lahitahev means to fall in love,
yeah,
because it's when 2 people fall in love.
yeah,
It is a reciprocal verb.
got it.
Okay, so when you talk about, you could say that you fell
Or
in love.
to be
with
in
something.
love, maybe.
No.
No.
It means to fall in love. That's what it means. To fall in love, yeah. Yeah, to fall in love. So it means. I mean, and you can take another example. Look on. It doesn't matter what page you look on. So let's look on. We'll do another example in depth. Look on page 3. We'll do page 3 in depth. Okay, that's what I want to do later. Zahar, and what was this one? Like Yizkor, remembering, right? Zikaron, memory, right? A lot of things coming from this root. Zayin, Kaf, Resh means to remember. So the pa'al, the first one you see there, under zahar, right? That's pa'al. What's the next verb there? Nizkar. Nizkar is nifal form, okay? And then the next one you've got maskir. Maskir is hifid form, okay? And then the next one is muskar. Muskar is hufad form, right? So you've got, in this case, 4 different verbs that are all created from the same root, that are all related in meaning because it's the same root, right? The meaning really is in the root, but these forms have their own meanings. They have grammatical meanings, okay? And so it becomes very predictable. It's not just random. It's not like, oh, we have 4 verbs. We have 4 verbs and only 1 root, so let's just, it's a toss-up, like, oh, it'll be this form, that form, that. No. Every form has its own kind of like deeper meaning. So if you turn to the other sheet where I outlined it, we'll go through it real quick. The most common form of all verbs is the pa'al form, and it's the most basic form. Okay, and this one is going to be always it's transitive, intransitive, and always in the active voice. So what does that mean, transitive, intransitive? Transitive means that it can take a direct object, right? It's an action done to something, right? Intransitive is an action that is not done to something. It is just an action. What's the difference? Walking, if I'm just walking, if you say he's walking, she's walking, we're walking, is intransitive. But if I'm walking a dog, that becomes transitive, right? If I'm, does that make sense? Yeah. Everyone makes sense? Okay, I'm not gonna go into more of an explanation, but that makes sense. Active voice means there's a subject, and then this verb is the active, and then there's the object, right? The passive voice is the opposite of the active voice. A passive voice is when there is no subject. So if you say,
mistakes were made.
Mistakes were made, perfect, right? Mistakes were made, you'll know who made them, right? So in English, we have a certain way that we can take any verb and we can turn it into a passive, right? We just use the kind of past tense form and we just skip the subject of the sentence. We just take what would be the object, which is the recipient of the action, typically becomes the subject. But in Hebrew, it's the same thing, except we have specific binyanim that are passive voice, right? So nifal is the passive voice of pa'al, right? So many times you'll get a verb that's in pa'al, and you'll have a corresponding verb in nifal that is just a passive version of that one. Sometimes you'll have a verb in nifal that is not a passive voice. It may be, there are other types, but they're less common, but like, one example is like, leikanes, nichnas, like to enter a room, if somebody enters a room, nichnas. That's not passive, that is actually intransitive. That is an intransitive verb, but nifal is always intransitive. That's one of the things about it. So it can be an intransitive verb or the passive of pa'al. PL are other verbs that can be also similar to pa'al. The difference here is, in some cases, PL is like a more, it'll be a more intense version of the pa'al verb. So one example I have here is shabar is the pa'al verb. Shabar, he broke. Shiber is he smashed, right? So it's like a more intense version of a very similar action. The other possibility with the PL is, like you saw, pa'al may be transitive or intransitive. Sometimes you have a pa'al verb that is intransitive, but then you'll have, from the same root, you'll have a PL verb that is the transitive version of that. So what would be an example of that? Like lekadesh, like we say kiddush, right? Lekadesh that is a PL verb. Because the Pa'al version of that, which is not commonly used, but is where the word Kodesh comes from, I mean, holy, it just means being holy. But PL means to sanctify, to make holy, right? So so the Pa'al is, in that case, the Pa'al verb was intransitive, meaning it was someone is just being holy, right? But the PL version of that is the transitive, meaning it's acting on something, making something holy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? All right. Now we've got Pu'al. Pu'al is the passive voice of PL. The thing about Pu'al, and then also same thing with Hifil, Hufal, same thing, they come in pairs, like that, right? Unlike Nifal, which is the passive of Pa'al, these two are kind of like truncated versions. So they don't have any imperatives, they don't have any infinitives, and they don't have any verbal nouns, right? Like we were giving an example earlier, sing, to sing is a noun. If I say, oh, I'm singing, singing, to sing is a verb. If I say I'm singing, I'm saying a verb, right? I'm doing an action. But if I say, oh, I really love your singing, I took that same word singing, that's a noun, because I'm describing the entire action as a noun. So then, for that, you're using a verbal noun. So every one of these has verbal noun except Pu'al and Hufal. They don't. They use the same one as the PL and Hifil, right? So they just have a present, past, and future form, that's it. But these are passive voice, right? So PL, passive voice, Pu'al. Hifil, the meaning of Hifil is causative, right? So let's take a look at an example here from Zahar. So, first one, right? Zahar, Zoher, right? He's remembering, Zoher, right? Then you got Niskar. Niskar is to be reminded, right? To be mentioned, to be reminded, right? So that is like the passive voice of the Pa'al, right?
I have a silly question.
What?
Walk me through how we conjugate. I don't understand how we conjugate and we get the Pu'al from one of these root verbs. Like how do we?
Yeah, there's no Pu'al in this one.
Or even if it's the Nifal or the Pa'il.
Yeah, we'll go into detail on it.
Okay.
We'll go into detail. I'm just giving a big picture right now.
Got it.
Just look at the big picture. The big picture is you've got Zahar, that's the Pa'al verb. That is to remember, right?
Yeah.
So he remembered. Niskar, it means he recalled or was reminded. Okay? Then Hizkir. This is Hifil. Hizkir. Hizkir or Maskir in the present tense. Maskir. Maskir, causative. What does that mean? It means I remind you.
You're calling someone.
I cause you to remember.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that is, right? It is when you're acting on something else to cause them to do something.
Which is active causative.
It is active, yeah. That one is active. And then the passive voice of that is the one below it, Muskar, which means to be mentioned. Okay?
Which is
That's just
that would be the Kufal, the passive, right?
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah. And now these, so like if you have a PL, verb, you have a Pu'al verb, because you can always turn that into a passive voice.
Yeah.
If you have a Hifil, you'll have a Hufal. So these come together, these kind of go together, right? But then you won't always have a Nifal for every Pa'al. You won't always have Hipa'el. Hipa'el is, we didn't get to it really good.
Why wouldn't you always have a passive? Why don't you always have a Nifal?
Why would you not always?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it just doesn't exist.
Okay.
There's not all of these forms exist for every root.
Got it.
Sometimes you'll just have a root that may just have one of them. Sometimes it might just be Pa'al and it's done.
Yeah.
There's nothing else, no other forms. Like anything, it can exist in theory, right? Like you can conjugate it based on the rules it just doesn't exist in the language and has no meaning.
Yeah.
You know, it may have a theoretical meaning, but no one ever uses it. So, okay, so does this kind of make sense, what this is? And then we're gonna go into detail about how to actually conjugate the verb, which is what you were asking about. Right? It's okay, I'm gonna erase it. I want to start with the pa. And we ended the last time, which none of you guys were here. We ended with the present tense. And what I explained is the present tense is not truly a tense. Okay? If you look at any of these tables, you'll see the present tense only has 4 forms. Right? Okay, let's just take a look at the first one, aha, right? We can just take that as an example. Right, so let's take a root, we'll take the root aha. Okay, meaning to love. Right? You see the present tense is only 4 forms. It's ohev, ohevet, ohavim, and ohavot. Right, and so these are not true verbal forms. These are more like similar to like the ing form in English, right? Which is more like a do. It can also be the er form in English, meaning like a lover or loving. This is kind of what that means, right? So it has endings that are similar to nouns or adjectives, because it acts like a noun or an adjective, right? In reality, there's no true present tense. It doesn't really exist. It's more like, you can think of it also like, Ani ohev is like saying, I am loving, sort of. That's the present tense. Like, or I am a lover of, whatever you're describing. But it's used like a present tense, right? It's not grammatically truly a tense, it's just used like a present tense, right? So that's present tense. It's not complicated at all. We'll look at past tense and future tense. That's what we want to look at today. So past tense only has suffixes. What you do is you take, for the pa'al one, okay, we're going to start with pa'al. Okay, you take the root, and now you see, this is telling you the third person past tense form, the name of the binyan. So if the name is pa'al, that means your vowels are going to be a. So it's going to be aha, right? Aha. Okay. Like you see, that's the who form. Okay.
Huh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's weird.
Here, we do like this, who, right? What's the he form? We do he form on there. Okay. He form is ahavat. Because the feminine you add hey at the end. Ahavat. Okay. And then what's the ani form? We'll start at the top again. It goes ani, right? Ata, at. Okay, hu, he, anahu. Okay, atem. Atem, and then they have also a 10, but I'm not going to write all of it out. We'll follow this chart, similar to this chart. So it'll be atem slash aten, and then we'll do ham slash, right? Ham head, right?
Yeah.
So ani ahavti. right?
So it's not ani ohev,
Ani ohev is correct,
but
but
that wouldn't be
Past
pa'a.
it's pa.
So ani ahavti.
Ahavti, this is past tense.
Yeah.
This is past tense right now. So, okay, ata ahavta. And at ahavt. Now here's something I wanna point out to you, like, when you're writing this with, just know without the nikudot, these look exactly identical without nikudot. Because there is no, even though it's pronounced ahavta, you're not putting any hey after it. Right? It just is written exactly the same. But this ata ahavta, at ahaft. Okay, it kind of matches with the pronoun. Okay. Okay, ani ahavti, ata ahavta, at ahaft, hu ahav, hi ahva, anachnu ahavnu. Okay, atem ahavtem. Aten ahavtem.
Yeah.
Okay, hem ahavu. Ahavu. So, what do we notice here? We notice here we got, this is like our pa'al. The basic form here is the hu past tense form. Okay, this form right here. And this form right here appears over and over again. This is the basic form for all of them. You see it in there, right? If I pick this out, then all that's left here is just the suffix. So this has no suffix, and these have these suffixes to this, right? So it's very, and these suffixes are exactly the same for all the binyamin. If you look at it, they're the same for all the binyamin. So what changes in the binyan is changes, this part changes, right? It's like, let's take a look at another example. So let's turn to page 4 for the example, okay? The root
What's
here,
the third suffix? The third one down.
this one,
Oh.
is exactly the same as this one, but pronounced differently.
Yeah, how do you pronounce it?
You pronounce it as just ends on a T, like at, right? At, aha, ata, aha. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is erase very carefully just the word and leave the suffixes. I'm gonna go with another one, another verb.
Can we pause for 1 second and
Yeah.
just catch up on my notes?
Yeah, for sure. I'm just gonna rewrite it for that. Okay.
It's anachnu ahavnu.
Yeah, no, that's right. Okay. Do you have any questions? Does this make sense? You knew all this, right?
Past tense I'm good on, it's all the other ones that,
Do you know past tense?
yeah, pretty well.
Oh, okay, good. We'll do future tense too,
I know.
because you guys are smart and handle both. Ready?
Never.
You're always ready, right?
Never.
Pa'al. So now we're doing, again, same thing as pa'al. I mean, same thing as last time is ahav. This is bahar. Bahar means, the meaning of that root is to choose. Okay? So pa'al, you see it meaning choose, select, pick, prefer, or vote for. Okay?
What page are we on?
On page 4. Alright. So we're looking at the past tense. It's going to be exactly the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
the point of what I'm trying to make right now is I'm taking it and I got my who form, which is just bahar, bahar.
Yeah.
And then that same bahar gets filled in wherever there's a blank.
So it says Baharti.
Ani baharti. Let's go ahead. You guys can say it with me. Ata
Baharta.
at
Bahart.
bahart. Hu bahar. He bahara.
Bahra.
Yeah, bahara. It shortens, well,
They actually
it
put
says here
Bahara.
bahara, but
Bahra.
it says here bahara because it's a guttural, so you have to add another vowel after it, but people don't say that all the time because it's like colloquially you speak in the word. Whatever, this is a technicality.
Got it. In everyday speech, nobody would say Bahara, they wouldn't waste their breath on that.
I
So-
don't think so.
Got it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Noted.
Okay, he bahara, אנחנו בחרנו, אתם בחרתם, הם בחרו. Okay, now, we're gonna take this root, and we're gonna say, it's no longer I'm choosing, we're talking about something that was chosen. So now that thing that was chosen becomes the subject. Maybe I was chosen. How would I say I was chosen? Well, I would change this, not al, I would use the different verb. It would be the nifal, right? So the nifal version of this root is just gonna be like this. You just add a nun. There you go. Now you went from bahar to nibhar.
So we copy the vowels from, we copy the vowels and the prefix from the binyamin.
Yeah, binyanim, yeah. The binyan, the name, like I said, the name of the binyan is itself the form.
Okay.
Yeah, so if it's nifal, all you do is the same change that happens from pa'al to nifal. See, this, you might think, oh, it might be confusing because you're like, oh, this has an F and that has a P. That's the same letter.
Yeah.
You have to understand, like, this is pa'al and this is nifal. Do you see?
Yeah.
That's it. So the difference, to go from pa'al to nifal is very simple. This is, right, you add a nun, and the vowel here becomes a yud. Not a
It's
yud.
always a nun?
Yeah. You add for nifal, yeah. And it's a ni-fal, it's not a na-fal, right? It's a ni-fal, so it's pronounced e, ni-fal. So it goes nivchar. That's how you pronounce that one, nivchar.
Oh, so the that doesn't have a noun, right? It's like an ending, so it's niv chal instead of vahal or bahal. Niv chal.
Yeah,
Got
it's
it,
like
got it,
this.
got it. So it's not, we're not adding an extra syllable. We're the nun is inheriting the syllable.
Yeah,
Got it.
in this case, yeah. And I mean, you can see it right there.
So this, it does have a vowel, but
Mhm.
it's just a silent vowel.
Yeah.
So this do not see it.
Okay,
Yeah, one
so
of these things.
so how do we conjugate it? Well, we conjugate it exactly the same way as we did the pa'al. Literally, we take nibchar. Nibchar is now our form here, right? For the hu nibchar, he was chosen. Ani, let's fill in the blank.
Nivcharti.
Nibcharti, exactly. Ata
Nivchar.
nibcharta, you were chosen. You were chosen. You're speaking to a female. At
That's nivchar.
nibchar. Hu nibchar. Okay, he
Nivchara.
nibchara. That's right. And then anachnu
Nivcharnu.
nibcharnu. Atem
Nivcharten.
nibchartem. Yeah. And hem
Nivcharu.
nibcharu. Exactly. So this is. So now you understand how this whole system works. We're going to do the same thing again with another one. In this case, Bahar only has these two, right? They don't have any other forms for the other people. Let's look at some other forms here. They're good examples. Here, let's jump into not another topic, but I just wanna like cement this in, right? I wanna teach you with the pa'al nifa. I wanna focus on this right now for a second, and we'll go into the other meaning. Okay, we'll do another root, because I wanna show you something that's a little different. This root is a very common one. Ein, sin, hey, right? Right? Asa, right, means to do.
Like a curling.
La'asot, to do. Okay. So in this case, what happens? Well, the difference here is it ends on a hey. And when you have a root, the three-letter root that ends, the last letter is a hey. The hey, when you conjugate it, it changes to a yud. And that happens every time, 100% of the time. That the third letter is a hey.
For every binyan.
Every, yeah, for everything. It will always become, it will always become a yud. So when you say, let's say the pa'al, right? We'll do pa'al first. So the pa'al is asa, right? Okay. Asa. So you don't say, yeah, asiti. Exactly. Not asati, asiti. And it just continues that way.
But that's still pa.
But what happens is, that only happens when you have an ending. So this is still asa. Okay, now what happens with he? He,
So,
asta. Okay, asta. Alright,
Stop.
yeah. This is because you add the hey. Sorry, it was supposed to be here.
Well, why is the initial hey turn into a
Atav,
tav? Thank you for telling me what the letters
because that's what happens every time. The hey frequently turns into a tav. If the hey at the end is a very weak letter, it will always change something as soon as you add an ending to it. So if you add a hey after another hey, the first one turns to a tav. It's just a thing. There's another rule in general. This is an aside. If you have something called smichut, if you have two nouns together, like I'm like blanking right now. I want to come up with an example. Oh, perfect example. Medinat Israel, right? This is just an aside, total aside from what we're doing. But what's Medina? Medina means state, right? But now you want to say state of Israel. So you add the word Israel to it. The of is implied in the fact that you have two nouns back to back. But when you do that, you change this to a tav. It becomes Medinat Israel. Right? So this is a common thing that happens in Hebrew all the time. Same thing happens in Arabic as well. It's the same thing. So that's what happens because you add another hey after the first hey turns into a tav. So that went from asad to asta. All the other ones are getting different endings, and in that case the hey changes to a yud. And so it becomes asiti, asita, asit, asa, asta, asinu, asitam, and then asu. This one is just asu.
And there's no yod, it just goes to the
Yeah, it just becomes, you can see here, there's no yud. Just three letters. This one is like this. Asu. Right, so I wanted to just point out that this is one of those cases where it ends on a hey, it's going to be a little bit different, right? Now, what do we do? How do we handle this one if we want to say, oh, it maybe wants to be like, we want to say something was done, right? It was done. It was, right? So it's going to be nifa, right? So we had the nun in the front. Now, that becomes na'asa, right? And
Na'asiti?
yeah. It's the vowels shift a little bit.
Na'asiti.
So it's na'aseti, Naseti.
Naseti.
Yeah, you see in there, you see the vowels in
What
there.
page are you on?
Page 6 at the bottom, the very bottom. But yeah, it's, you're definitely really, really close. It's just, there's like a slight sound shift. So it's it becomes Naseti in this case.
How common is it to have a root like this?
Which one?
Like a side that ends in a hay and then all these rules are, you know.
Very common.
Very common?
A lot of,
Okay.
I don't know, it's common. It's pretty
Okay.
common.
So I have to learn it. Got it.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of, definitely have to learn. Alright, so let's move on to a different pinyan. But you see that the endings are the same, right? We're not learning any new conjugations here. This is the past tense conjugation. Let's see what else we've got here. I didn't really have a lot of the other ones. Yes, yeah, we can do, here's another one that's, I'll just take a look at it, page 2. This one has an the infinitive for it is irregular. Only the infinitive. Not only the infinitive, the future is also irregular for this one, but it's loma.
What's infinitive mean?
Infinitive is like the to form, like, so this one means to speak, to
Oh.
say, right, to say. So, in the Bible, you'll see the form lemor used,
Mm-hmm.
but it's in modern Hebrew, you say loma, loma, to speak, to say, to tell, or to say.
Where's the infinitive? Oh, down here.
Yeah, at the bottom, you see, in this case, they should show you two
Lomar.
forms. Lomar, and then lemor. Lemor is the way you would like build it, like theoretically, in terms of like how things are supposed to work in Hebrew.
This is colloquial.
Well, it's not colloquial, it is the standard Hebrew, it's official Hebrew, lomar. The other one, lemor, is what you see in the Bible, in the Torah. So I don't know when it changed, but it was probably already in ancient times that it changed to lomar, or like hundreds of years, many hundreds of years ago. But it follows the same pattern here. You see in the past tense, amarti, amart, amarta, amarti, amarta, amar, amra, amarnu, amartam, and then amru. And then to make it nifa, right? The form is ne'emar. Now, why is it ne'emar and not nimar? Because it starts with the aleph. So we saw one exception, not exception, but like certain like changes, accommodations, let's call them, made for the hey at the end. Now we're making accommodations for the aleph in the beginning.
Because you can't really end in an aleph sound.
Yes, it's not ending in aleph, it's starting with aleph.
Yeah, but when you add the nun in there,
Yeah,
that's why you
because of the
emphasis.
aleph, the nun gets a e, it's a double s sound.
Yeah.
Is what happens. It becomes ne'emar. And then, but then once you've got that form,
Why wouldn't it be ni'emar?
that's just how it is. It's ne'emar.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's exactly because it is with an aleph to start.
Yeah, but
Right.
every time it starts with an aleph, when it goes to nifal, it will always be ne'e. Every time. So once you get that form, that base form, which is the masculine singular past tense form, right? The who form. In this case, ne'emar, all you do is apply these endings to it, it becomes like a piece of cake. Ne'emarti, ne'emarta, ne'emar, ne'emar, ne'emra, ne'emarnu, ne'emartim, and ne'emhu.
And what does it actually mean if you say Anina MRT?
It doesn't mean anything because it's a theoretical thing.
So you,
Who can say I need Marti? Maybe in a cartoon where the sentence itself is speaking and says